hot coffee, and good conversations with your peers. So we are ready for our next session. And our next session is by Ankit Saxena, Senior Director, APAC and MEA at Branch. He's a technology business leader with a proven track record of building and leading high-performance teams in core engineering, customer success, field engineering, and enterprise sales. He has led global teams across the full spectrum of tech business. So please welcome Ankit on stage. The stage is yours. Yes, give a big round of applause.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. What an amazing 2 days we are having, right? We spoke about acquisition strategies, growth, and retention, but here I am today talking about the most important piece, which is churn. Nobody likes churn, right? Like, it's the most dreaded word for any app developer or business owner. My name is Ankit. I head up the business for Branch in APAC and MEA region. For those of you who don't know, Branch is a cross-platform linking and measurement tool used by over 75,000 apps across the globe, including the likes of Spotify, Uber, and in the region we have Saudi Telecom, the Landmark Group, and the Apparel Group. So before we talk about churn, I just want to do a quick refresher and talk about retention first. So at Branch, every year, we come up with a mobile growth handbook where we curate some of the top use cases and tactics built by mobile app developers across the globe. And until last year, we used to look at growth from the perspective of acquiring the user, and then activating them, engaging them, going through the cycle of retention, and then ultimately revenue. But all of that changed post-COVID last year, wherein what we saw was retention was the centerpiece of everything that app developers were doing with their users across all their platforms of web, app, offline, with QR codes and stuff, and then through the entire journey of the user, coming in from acquisition to engagement, and then ultimately advocacy and revenue. So retention became very important. Also, as a part of the surveys that we ran for the Mobile Growth Handbook, we saw that for almost 32% of the respondents, their biggest challenge was retention. And almost half of the advertisers had to move around, switch their media budgets to optimize for retention. So retention is really, really important. It's key, but it's also one of the most misunderstood concepts in the user growth journey. This is one of the retention lifecycle framework that one of our partners had built, when you can see that a current user can either be a power user or they can churn. Your new user can also churn. That's where you've lost the user. But the biggest opportunity lies in resurrecting your churn users, reactivating them, and then moving them back up as a power user. So let's talk about what is good retention. We'll talk about some of the resurrection tactics on the last slide. But what actually is good retention? I'll give you a moment to absorb this graph, but this is the retention curve for an average Android app, wherein you can see it's pretty brutal, actually. D3 onwards, an average app loses 77% of their daily active users. Now, you might think that this is an average across the entire landscape of Android apps, but we broke this down into 4 buckets of app rankings. So you would see the top 10 apps going all the way down to the next 5,000 apps, right? Well, of course, the top 10 apps fall through to a different baseline. But what's key here is to see that there is a cliff at the end of the 3rd day. And whatever you do to engage or retain your users after the 3rd day, the ROI is pretty bleak. So one thing to take away from this is that the first 3 days of acquiring your users, you have a lot of opportunity in building really good experiences for them and making sure that they convert into a power user. But good retention also varies by category, right? For example, if you see here, branch, we operate in the enterprise SaaS segment here, wherein 90% is amazing retention for us over a period of 6 months. But if you're running a consumer social app, the good retention is 25%. You'll be doing amazing if you are able to retain 45% of your users at the end of 6 months. So you need to look where you lie in this category of good retention. Good retention also depends on where you lie in this frequency spectrum of usage, right? We have a lot of apps that all of us probably use. Some apps we use 50 times a day, probably lying on the extreme top left here, Instagram, TikTok. Whereas there are apps that you use probably once in 6 months or once in 3 months, depending on their use case and their utility to you. So if you understand where you lie in this category and where you lie in this spectrum of frequency of usage, you would be able to gauge what good retention is for your business. So, quick refresher, we spoke about retention. Retention is important, it's the key, and it is brutal. You need to figure out what you need to do in the first 3 days and also determine where you lie on the spectrum. So now let's talk about churn, right? So churn is nothing, the rate at which your users are leaving your product and service and they're not engaging with your product and service anymore. There are few myths associated with churn. The first one being a lot of companies do not prioritize their churn users. They don't want to go after their churn users. They'd rather go spend a lot of money and acquire new users through the funnel, but they miss out the churn users. But if you think about it, why do users churn? Users probably churn because they were not able to get what they wanted from your product or service. Maybe there was a slight technical bug or a glitch that made them offload from your platform. So if you're able to solve that one small problem, there's a higher likelihood of that user coming back to your product and service and reusing it again. It's also a lot easier for you to fix those small gaps, but it's also very, very much cost effective than going again behind acquiring new users. So churn users are your most valuable users. The second point here is, where is your churn user going? They probably had an intent that they wanted to do they couldn't get from your product and service, so they are going to your competition, right? And none of us want our customers churning and going to competition. So which is why looking after your churn users is all the way more important. Now, we looked at some of the different types of churn and why are users churning away from platforms. These are some of the top 6 types that we saw across all the apps that we were analyzing. And you will have either a bad product market fit, maybe the cost is not good. A couple of these that I really want to call out and talk about here are, first is activation. So what is activation? So you acquire a user, you take them through some sort of an onboarding flow so that they can get into your product and service and do what they wanted to do. But I've seen this time and again wherein app developers, for the sake of collecting a lot of data for personalization through the funnel to give better user experience down the funnel, they collect a lot of data upfront. Right? So let's say there's an amazing product market fit, your app is amazing, the design is superb, but on the registration screen, if you're giving me a 10-field form wherein you're asking about my age, my email number, and phone number, and you want to verify all of that, send me 10 different types of OTPs, it doesn't work, right? Everything was good, but I was just put off at the activation stage. The way we talk about is you need to find a sort of a balance between positive and negative experiences, and you can look at asking things from the user as a negative experience, right? Whereas if you were to delight me or show me the discounts or the offer or whatever I had down the funnel in the app up front, I am more likely to continue engaging with your product. So activation is where most of the churn happens. The second here is low intent users, right? So you have low intent users coming into your app, they will churn, it's fine, right? They did not have a lot of use case in the first place, they are coming in and they're churning out. What you need to do really well is measure whether the users that are churning from your product and service are low intent users or high intent users. And in those cases, the marketing team, the retention team, the growth teams need to work together to make sure that they are bringing in high intent users top of the funnel. A lot of times people would just spend or increase their acquisition spend just for the sake of getting more installs through the funnel and bring in a lot of low intent users that ultimately churn away. And that's not a very smart use of the dollars that you have. So keep in mind, activation is important, making sure you are bringing and your teams are aligned to bring in high intent users through the funnel. These are some of the tools in which you can measure and know why users are churning. You can use NPS to find a product market fit, and you can also set up analytics through the entire funnel to determine which of these different types are causing your users to churn. Next is another important concept related to churn is not all churn is created equal, right? So think of it in terms of having an app churn or a brand churn, right? So your brand might have an app, I might download it, I don't find probably a lot of utility in that app, and it's okay. I might uninstall the app, but I would still go on continuing with engaging with your brand in different platforms. Maybe it's an offline store, or maybe it's your desktop website, or maybe it's your mobile web. But if you were to give a bad experience to a user in either one of those platforms, that can lead to a brand churn. So you need to be very wary of how you are designing your experiences across all the different touch points where the users are engaging with your brand, and making sure that none of those individual platform churns are leading to a brand churn. So that is about churn. And the second myth or misconception that a lot of people have is, where does churn start? Right? Now, we might think of looking at churn as an inverse function of retention. Both are dependent on each other. So a lot of people think that churn actually starts when the retention phase starts, right? But in reality, churn starts right when you acquire the user. In some cases, maybe before that, because that depends on the kind of experience you're giving your users coming into the top of the funnel here. So what you need to do is you need to think about churn at each and every step of the way here, and make sure that user experiences and your communication with the user is optimized for each of these stages, and not just only at the retention stage. So we spoke about in the earlier diagram about resurrection and how you can actually win some of your users back. And I'll be showing some examples where we work with some of the top brands and building these experiences across all of the different platforms. This is app specific, but you need to understand that while your users are on the app, they are also on other platforms where they're hearing from you, where your brand is engaging with them. Some of these channels are emails, sending push notifications. This is a really good example wherein the app is still installed. This is an example from MyFitnessPal, wherein the app wants the user to log in their meals on a daily basis. So they are using really smart ways of sending push notifications, of resurrecting the churn user who has the app installed, but not using the app fairly often or for what it is intended. Another point that I would like to add here is, please let go of the 10-year-old metric of tracking uninstalls. It does not carry any weight in today's age, right? A user might have your app installs. There are probably 1 TB of spaces in everyone's phone today. So they will have the app somewhere in the app drawer, but they are not engaging with it. What you need to do across all these different categories, and there are some more that I'll cover in the examples ahead, is to create a sort of a surround sound rationale for your users to come back and engage again with your brand. So let's look at one of the examples. We were working with Peach Coffee in the US, wherein they had a lot of users that had the app installed, but they were not engaging with the app. And whatever use cases and stuff the developers were building, they were not seeing any sort of engagement. So as a tactic to re-engage users back into the app, they built some amazing QR code engagements. So you can see one is right here at the door, wherein users can order ahead. By the time they get in, their coffee is ready. They also printed out these QR codes on the coffee mugs. And what they saw from this is the re-engagement of user back into the app shot up as users were again notified, or they again wanted the users to come back into the app. The second one here is this really good example from BWS, which is a brand in Australia that we work with, wherein on the left you can see there is the desktop website. The user comes to the desktop website, finishes up a transaction, and then all those transaction details are packed into a branch link behind this QR code. And the user is incentivized again to download or reopen the app so that they can continue tracking their order and shipment details on the app. So slight nudges coming in from different channels and platforms back into the app. The other thing that you also need to be mindful of is across all these different channels, which is push notification, SMSs, and emails, you need to build your communications in a fashion wherein you're getting the user to opt in more, and that you can do by giving them incentives. This is another cool example. This is actually from a live screen grab from a live TV show. This is a rerun of Friends happening. And you can see there's a smart QR code that takes the user to the Cyber Monday sale that we're running for Lego. And all of this is tracked back to the campaign, that tracked back to the user experience that we are driving. Another example here is from Times, wherein the link, if the app is installed, takes the user directly to the radio page in the Times app. If not, it actually goes to the App Store, and then the user goes to the specific radio show. Similarly, you can build these experiences in mobile web. A lot of times, your user might have the app installed, but they are going into their mobile web, and you can nudge the user back. Sorry, just last one. This is a cool referral use case. A lot of people think that referral is only for acquiring users and it's only for the growth stage, but that's not correct. You can use referrals as a really good re-engagement tactic as well by building double-sided referrals, wherein you build a chain and everyone who is on the chain is getting some kickbacks. So final reminders. I know we are going through this age where there's a huge upswing in app users. The adoption of apps are increasing across the globe. So if you have a lot of users, aim for building loyalty and retaining those users for the long term. And if your traffic is lower right now, just prioritize for the relationships. Make sure that your users are getting a cohesive, coherent experience across all those platforms, and build for relationships. Revenues will automatically follow. So that was me. Thank you for listening. We are right across outside this door. If you want to have a look at our mobile growth handbook, please drop by. Thank you, and have a rest of the evening ahead.
Thank you so much, Ankit and Branch, for a great session.